We have a very lively group, which is awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. Today, we're here to talk about how to hopefully thrive in the AI era, skills for today's job market. I am Adam Wright. I'm an associate professor of economics here at Western. I also am the director of the Center for Economic and Financial Education. A few housekeeping items before we jump in. To kick things off, I would like to read our land acknowledgement statement. Western's main campus is situated on the ancestral homelands of the Coast Salish peoples who have lived in the Salish Sea Basin all throughout the San Juan Islands and the North Cascades watershed from time immemorial. We express our deepest respect and gratitude to our indigenous neighbors for their enduring care and protection of our shared lands and waterways. Also, I'll go over an agenda in a second, but we'll have time for Q&A at the end. If those people in Zoom land, thank you. If you registered and you submitted a question, we will try to integrate that in. You can also use the Q&A button at the very bottom middle to submit your questions as we go. I also have an announcement from the accounting department. They snuck in some promotion here. Tomorrow, Wednesday, 4 to 6 p.m. in Parks Hall 210. I'm not going to get his name right, but a Whatcom CPA will give a hands-on AI experience for accountants, focusing on accounting tools and AI. So again, that's 4 to 6 p.m. tomorrow in Parks Hall 210. All right, well, let's get started. So our agenda for today, I'm going to give some background on what's going on with AI in the world of work. I'll talk about the labor market. I'll talk about the stock market. And then the bulk of our time today will be for panelist discussion. Again, I mentioned there'll be a Q&A towards the end. And hopefully make sure that no refreshments, no cookies, no drinks go uneaten. They'll be living in Miller Hall collaborative space. So feel free to grab those afterwards. Panelists will hang around after for a little bit, come up and meet them, network a little bit. If you are interested in getting a badge to post on LinkedIn, you can do it through this QR code. It's the same QR code that was in the sign-in sheet outside. I will post this QR code at the end in case you want it. And then anybody who signed in will email you in case another way to make sure you get that AI badge if you so want it. Before I introduce our amazing panelists, I want to start with sort of a broad overview. Why are we here? What's the whole point of this discussion? We are officially in the era of AI, and we'll talk about maybe we could put a date in a year or a month in a year at least of when the AI era started. I'm going to go with October 2022. I'll come back to that in a second. But with being in the AI era, there's, I think, a lot of hope, a lot of excitement, a lot of transformation happening. And at the same time, I think a lot of anxiety. Questions like, is AI going to replace me? Or is AI potentially a great collaborator, maybe the best possible collaborator to increase my productivity? Do I need to reskill or upskill in the era of AI, or should I double down on those skills that are uniquely human? Should I think about reinvesting my efforts into things that AI is not so good at? So to help us get clarity and give insights, I'll introduce each one of our panelists. First, we have Christy Johnson. Christy is a lecturer at UW, a Botha-Chan coach at Stanford University, and founder of Artemis Connection. She is an entrepreneur, educator, board member, founder and CEO of her fourth startup, that's Artemis, which is a strategy consulting firm. Christy earned a bachelor's degree from Western in economics. We'll move on. We'll hold our applause just for a second. We'll applause maybe at the end. Dana Rozier is also a Western alum. She's an AI educator and consultant. She was founder and CEO of Nova Consulting AI, a Whatcom County firm that provides AI training and strategy for small businesses. Dana received her bachelor's degree in English and Language Arts teacher education from Western's Fairhaven College. Next, we have another Western alum, Justin Gruba, who is managing director of state and local tax at KPMG in Seattle. Justin received his bachelor's degree in accounting from Western in 2007, where he also has the very distinguished honor of being Victor E. Viking, the mascot. He is a first-generation college graduate and is dedicated to enabling opportunity. Justin founded the Spirit Scholarship at Western and also serves on the accounting department's advisory board. And lastly, we'll call him an honorary Western alum, Seth Burgesson, not from Western, but For today, let's pretend. He's Senior Manager of AI and Responsible AI at PwC. Seth focuses on AI strategy, generative AI, and AI governance, where he leads AI strategy and responsible AI projects for clients in tech, finance, healthcare, and operations. Please give a warm welcome to our panelists. Before I let them take the lead in our discussion, I'm just going to be a little bit more clear in defining and giving some background. What do we mean by the era of AI? What is the AI revolution? And some of this I'm sure you have sort of an intuitive sense of, but maybe some of it is new to you. So when I think about the AI revolution, I think about how AI is basically affecting everything, all parts of society right now. The economy, public services, work, media, culture, relationships. The big technological breakthrough that recently happened is generative AI, which is the ultra-realistic pictures you see generated by AI, or being able to create text or video that very much mimics maybe an expert in any given field. And just to give you a sense of the scale or how quickly things grew, in order to reach 1 million users, Netflix took 2.5 years, Instagram took 2.5 months, and ChatGPT took 5 days when it came out in October of 2022, which is pretty amazing scaling. Along with this scaling, I think comes some hopes and fears, some possible future outcomes. On the hope side, I would say the hope for AI is broad productivity growth, that this will enhance skills of everyone broadly across sort of the spectrum, high-skilled workers and low-skilled workers. In fact, AI could be pro-worker, such that it reduces the barriers to getting certain skills or acquiring certain knowledge. That could help reduce inequality if it sort of reduces those barriers for people who otherwise wouldn't have been able to access those things. There could be all sorts of new jobs and new industries related to AI. And again, I think another really best case scenario is that AI learns from human expertise and makes it ubiquitous, that maybe expertise will no longer be scarce. It can be in the hands of the many, not concentrated among the few. And then potential for a better work-life balance. If AI makes those menial tasks or those repetitive tasks obsolete, or you can just sort of outsource to AI, that could free up time for doing more meaningful things in life. But I think, in equal parts hope, we have at least as much fear around AI, which hopefully our panelists will talk about both of these things. The fears are that I generally hear have to do with mass unemployment, that maybe instead of complementing human skills, AI substitutes human skills, does the work for us, and humans no longer need apply to certain jobs. Perhaps it's the gains from AI will be concentrated among few and the costs widespread among many people in terms of energy usage or unemployment. It could further dehumanize work if it creates another barrier between people creating a product, say, and the end user, the consumer. Then there's just another barrier that sort of doesn't allow you to connect, empathetically or social emotionally to the end user, the person on the other end of your product. AI companies currently have and probably will have increased power over public discourse. AI companies have now delved into social media. They're in the news. They're, again, affecting all parts of life and can thus steer public discourse in a way that maybe benefits themselves. And then along with, sort of the counter to better work-life balance is, well, what if, AI makes you twice as productive, but then your employer just expects you to do twice as much? Then in some sense, you're really not better off. Maybe you just have higher expectations, but you get no further, say, benefits or pay from that. So let's talk about a few things I keep seeing in the news, sort of set the stage. Like, what do the data say? Let's get rid of, sort of the anecdotes and sort of the qualitative parts of AI, and let's talk about sort of the hard data. What do we know about how AI is changing the workforce? And then we'll get insights from our panelists. So the first thing, this is unemployment for new graduates. So this is the thing I see or I read a lot, is that it's harder and harder for new college graduates to find work. And that is true in the data. If we sort of follow recent college graduates, they're in red here, and we'll compare them to, say, in black, that's all workers' unemployment. If we sort of zoom over to 2025, recent college graduates, the unemployment rate is about 6%. And you can see there's an interesting inversion that happened. It used to be if you were a college graduate, you had lower unemployment than sort of the workforce at large. And that's been true at least for the last 25 years. But you can see in more recent data that that's sort of inverted. And in fact, college graduates, this is 22 to 27-year-olds, college graduates' unemployment rate is now approaching the blue line. And the blue line is the same age, 22 to 27, without a college degree. Though I should say the idea of the inversion here of the red and the black lines, that happened pre-COVID. Here's the big COVID spike in unemployment. So not clear to me that's AI, but remember, we think of drawing a line in the sand. ChatGPT came out in 2022. We see this sort of noticeable uptick in unemployment. So something to be concerned about. And I just pulled a headline from the Wall Street Journal and a quote from an article titled, "Young Graduates Are Facing an Employment Crisis." The culprit, economists say, I love when news outlets quote economists like it's like there's one opinion among economists. Economists say this economist said is what they should have said. But anyway, economists say there's a general slowdown in hiring is the culprit. That hasn't really hurt people who already have jobs because layoffs too have remained low, but it has made it much harder for people who don't have work to find employment. Well, let's look at that. I always like to verify these sort of quotes. Let's look at hiring rates. Hiring rate is measured by, you can think of the hiring rate as the percent of the workforce that's new hires. So it's a simple ratio. It's number of new hires in the numerator, and in the denominator, it's the total employment. So you can see here recently, the hiring rate is something like a little bit less than 3.5%, call it 3.4%. And if we ignore the crazy stuff that happened during COVID, where the hiring rate fell during COVID, but then exploded as people went back to work, you've got to go all the way back. When was the hiring rate this low? You have to go all the way back to February 2014. Basically 11 years, we have not seen a hiring rate this low. Though I will say to especially our student members here that, fear not, this is when I graduated, and maybe a couple people on our panel, I graduated during the Great Recession when the hiring rate was even worse than that. So this isn't to say like, you're fine, you don't have it so bad, but maybe the main takeaway here is it's not great. It's not historically bad, but it's not great, and it hasn't been sort of this low for probably a decade. Every graph I put up here, I think, just creates new questions. Well, what's driving that? What's driving the hiring rate being low? Well, I think there's an interesting story. If we separate the unemployment rate by gender, if we look at men versus women, men are in red here, women are in blue, and there's a lot of noise here. This is looking at very new entrants to the labor market, recent college grads, 20 to 24 years old. Men's unemployment rate in red right now is close to 10%, which is a very high unemployment rate, though you can see that men have experienced this unemployment rate in the past, and there's a lot of noise in the data. Women's is much lower, almost half that, hovering around 5%. So again, well, why is that? Why is men's unemployment rate like twice that of women's? So what I did was, because unfortunately, and some of you might know the reason for this, but Bureau of Labor Statistics data stops in June of this year. It does not go any further, and it's hard to get really precise job-level data from public resources, but there's really good private data. This is data from ADP, which is the largest provider of payroll software in the United States. This is employment. I'm going to show you 3 different occupations, 2 of which I think are very exposed to AI, and 1 of which I don't think is exposed at all to AI. And hopefully it'll be obvious which is which. So the first one, software developers, exposed to AI or not? Yeah, potentially very exposed. And so what do you see? Remember this line in the sand that happened in 2020? So this is basically the change in basically employment relative to when ChatGPT turned on in October 2022. You can see software developers, and this is by where you are in your career. So blue, we're going to focus on blue, that's early career, like you just started. You can see that for everyone, hiring was going up until 2022, and then we see this divergence. It's sort of amazing how sort of consistent, all levels hiring was going up for software developers. ChatGPT turns on, and then we see this plummet. In fact, from that peak in 2022, new hires, early career hires, are down basically 20%. And you can see sort of the effect ratchets is proportional basically to how long you've been employed. So software developers, very exposed. Also tends to be more of a male-dominated field, and so that might explain why their unemployment is higher than women's. Let's do another one where it's not so obvious. It's not a male-dominated field, customer service, but exposed to AI or not. Yeah, model. It depends. I think of customer service as maybe, if it's in-person customer service, I would say no, it's not very exposed to AI. But you think of like chatbots online, or you think of like robocalls or something like that. That's pretty exposed to AI. AI is pretty good at doing that sort of thing. We see a very similar story. We see this increase across all career trajectories except ChatGPT turns on, and then we see a decline, particularly for early career, age 22 to 25 entrants. How about a sector, I guess I've left the one at the end that's just not very exposed to AI, health aides. What do we see with health aides? Well, employment was increasing relative to when ChatGPT turned on, and if anything, it's increased even faster post ChatGPT, with in fact the early career hires, age 22 to 25, going up faster than even more experienced groups. And again, this might help solve sort of the men-women unemployment puzzle. This tends to be more dominated, fields more dominated by women. These tend to be in-person interactions. Think of home health nurse or physician's assistant. Now, that was the labor market. How about a couple things about the stock market or the US economy in general? So this was data. This is all recent as of October this year. So it might have changed a little bit in the month of November, but not much. The stock market's down a little bit. But nearly 40%, this is crazy, 40% of US GDP growth this year comes from AI. GDP is gross domestic product. It's the total market value of all the final goods and services that we produce. 40% of growth comes from AI. According to Morgan Stanley, roughly 75% of the S&P 500 returns. S&P 500 is an index of basically the 500 leading publicly traded US companies. 75% of S&P 500 returns, 80% of earnings growth, and 90% of capital expenditure growth can be attributed to the AI data center build-out. Where are AI companies getting their money for this huge data center build-out? Well, they're borrowing it. AI companies hold about $1.2 trillion in debt, the largest segment in the investment grade market. And now, this has never been true, at least as long as I've been alive, that three companies, NVIDIA, Microsoft, and Apple, now comprise over 20% of the S&P 500 index. So the S&P 500 index, if you added up the market capitalization of all the companies in the S&P 500, it's around 60 trillion. So that means if we add up the market capitalization of NVIDIA, Microsoft, Apple, it's something like 12 or 13 trillion dollars valuation among three companies. It wasn't just a few years ago that the idea of a $1 trillion company seemed far-fetched, and now we have three that are well over that. And I'll end with just sort of one thing before we go to our panelists, and I'll stop talking. From this, it's pretty clear, at least to me in this last slide, that this is sort of evidence that the gains from AI are sort of being concentrated. There's a few companies that are really making out quite well due to, say, the data center build-out or investor speculation. So who are the losers? So I started doing a Google search, and what kept coming up was Chegg. Does anyone know what Chegg is? I guess it is. I won't say was. Don't be all cheaters. I know all of you. No, I'm just kidding. So Chegg, for those of you who don't know, if you look at Chegg's website, they're like, we're a tutoring service. We offer help and expertise. If you get stuck on a homework problem or if you get stuck on an exam, we have experts here to help. Well, that might be in theory, but in practice, it's where you go get answers. You can't figure out a homework answer, you go to Chegg, because often students just upload homework answers if they've been used before. They ask experts like, hey, help me on problem 7. They upload the PDF. Whatever you think about Chegg, it seems to be sort of the poster child of, well, this is low-hanging fruit for AI. You've got what used to be questions answered by experts, by people. Now AI can do that. You type in your problem and AI can do it. So when I did some research and I kept seeing this example, like ChatGPT's announced here where Chegg's stock price was trading around $26. It's now trading around $1. And they're like, well, this is the canary in the coal mine. This is what's coming for other companies. Though you can see an issue with this story. When did Chegg, it's not clear to me that Chegg's downfall came because of ChatGPT. This might have been in the death knell. This might have been the final kick. But really, Chegg exploded during COVID when things moved online. But then higher education enrollments declined. There's issues in the labor market. People didn't want to pay for Chegg anymore. And then you see this huge decline. And then again, it was probably already on its way out, but maybe ChatGPT was the final sort of kick to the curb. Okay, I've just thrown a lot of information out at you. Hopefully some of it is useful. But now I want to turn to our panelists to give us some clarity, like what's really going on underneath the hood here. What are some insights we should take away? So I have some panel topics here broadly organized by what's going on in your company, in your industry specifically. What are the sort of essential skills you think people need to have right now in the era of AI? And then lastly, are there any AI tools that you would recommend? And then when using such tools, even if it's just ChatGPT or Gemini or basic prompting, what ethical dilemmas are there in your field? Like to what extent is it an employee's responsibility to verify that information is accurate, and are there consequences if it is not? So I will back up to first, we'll start off with our who'd ever like to go first. So I'll give you sort of the basic ideas you can think about, but feel free to take the conversation wherever you want to go. How is AI already beginning to reshape your industry? Is there misconceptions about AI? Is it a bunch of hype? What's the real part of AI? What's sort of the hype part? How have you seen your clients maybe using or implementing AI? And then maybe very pertinent to those of you thinking about going on the job market soon, has entry-level hiring changed as a result of AI? So who would ever like to, maybe Seth, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, Adam, thank you for having us here. I'm going to actually move a little bit just so I can see all these questions. This is like a dissertation amount of questions here, really.
You can just choose one, whatever you want.
Yeah, so I can talk about how AI is beginning to reshape your industry. So I work at PwC, brought the bright water bottle. Like KPMG, we do a lot of professional services. We have tax, we have audit, we have consulting. I'm on the consulting side. So we make a ton of decks, basically. I don't know if you know what management consultants do, but they make decks. They make really pretty decks. They make $1 million slides. So we're using AI a lot just in content creation and research. For many years at PwC for the audit and tax work, we've done a lot of automations that are traditional AI. They're not necessarily generative AI. But PwC, a couple of years ago, created our own chatbot called Chat PwC. It was a private instance of ChatGPT. So OpenAI wasn't training their model on anything that we were putting into it, so we could put confidential client data into it, because you don't want to put somebody's earnings that haven't been released yet into public chatbots. Yeah, exactly. It could be very, very bad and break a lot of laws. So we have Chat PwC. We've also been using ChatGPT Enterprise. I don't know if you've experimented with kind of stronger versions of ChatGPT. That's been very powerful. We also use Copilot. Microsoft, I live in Seattle. Microsoft's across the lake has been making a killing on Copilot licenses. I think a lot of our clients are getting Copilot licenses, but they don't necessarily know how to use Copilot. So it's just $25 to $30 a month per employee into Microsoft's pocket without a whole lot of use. So we're seeing a lot of use at PwC. We're certainly asking our employees to try to use AI to make their jobs faster and more efficient. At the same time, too, there's definitely sometimes a potential for over-reliance on the chatbots, too. I'm sure you can imagine doing your homework. It's very much like being a consultant sitting there. And, if you're asked to do research, do you ask ChatGPT to do it in 5 minutes? Do you really review the outputs before you pass it on to your manager or your boss? Or do you just kind of give it a cursory guess to see if there are any things that are, very, very wrong or clearly hallucinations? I would say, too, on the client side, before I pass on to our colleagues, our clients are struggling to try to figure out how to use generative AI. In the early days of ChatGPT, we were called up by a Fortune 20 company in the Midwest, and they said we need a generative AI strategy. And one of their executives had not heard about ChatGPT for 6 months. This was in summer of 2023, which is pretty shameful. So I don't think he was even talking to his grandkids or something about what they were using at school. And then one of them, I was telling Dana, one of the executives thought that everything was generative AI then. We'd advanced from the Bronze Age to the Steel Age after Bronze, or Bronze to something else. I'm a history major. I don't do that history stuff. So clients are really kind of struggling to try to figure out how to adopt it. And then, of course, trying to figure out how to rationalize the value of AI. You probably saw the MIT study over the summer that said 95% of generative AI pilot programs are failing to create value. It's a little bit of a misnomer, but the value creation is a little bit slower. And there's a lot of pressure on executives and decision makers at these companies to show that there's real value and value to the bottom line, which can be challenging to do. Let me pass it on to Dana, and we can circle back to any of those topics.
Well, Seth, here's something I think that's interesting that you said, that you you're hoping at PwC that your employees are using AI, but what kind of training are you providing them?
Excellent question. We do train our people. Yes.
But I see that a lot, that like some friends in town, he works like for a 2,500 employer company. They all have Microsoft Copilot licenses. Has he ever used it? No. So for me, AI literacy training is huge. So that's what I do for a living. So I have so my take on how has it changed my company? Since there is AI, I could have my company because you can't be an AI literacy trainer unless there is AI, right? So there is a huge need for it out in the world. And some of the clients I've been working with, so this is how it affected their business. Oh gosh, AI, it's not going away. I think we need to get trained. Freak out. How do we get trained? Who do you know who can train on AI? So they're starting to realize they need to bring it into their business. But if you've been running your business this way the whole time, it's this whole mind shift change to start using AI. What is AI? How can we use it in our business, right? That's what a lot of people are struggling with, how to do that. Misconceptions about the effect AI is having. I don't know. AI, I'm just thinking about misconceptions about AI. A lot of people do. It's going to take over my job. It's going to kill all of us. I don't know. We're going to see where that goes. I know. And has entry-level hiring changed as a result of AI? I've been asking a lot of the clients I work with, and in their companies, no. I mean, I read about it all the time in the paper, but local companies, not so much. Maybe just because it's Whatcom County.
Thank you. As we've been chatting, I think to me, the most interesting question is how has my company or my clients implemented Gen AI? Like Seth at PwC, my company, KPMG, very similar setup. We have a private version of ChatGPT that we can train on our own knowledge. And to me, that is very key because in the world of financial services and accounting, we have very specific guidelines we need to follow, whether that's for tax, which is the area I work in, or auditing, or any financial advice. And ChatGPT is not trained on that type of precise knowledge. It's everything on the internet, and we oftentimes don't want to rely on that to give us an answer. So we're spending a lot of effort, and I'm involved with these efforts at my firm to tailor a small language model or prompts or personas to be really adept at answering questions like, is this water bottle subject to sales tax in Washington? Are education services subject to sales tax in Washington? And being able to give us the right answer consistently and give us its reason why it gave us that answer consistently. And to be honest, it's not doing a very good job at that right at the moment. And I think that goes into the last question, which is how has that changed low-level hiring or what people are doing? We still need a lot of accountants and people with the background to understand what is the right answer and how you get the right answer. So you could validate what ChatGPT is giving you and perhaps guide it, still use it as an aid, but have the knowledge base that you can determine if it's what has given you is correct, and if not, get it back on the right path.
All right. Thank you. I'll try to add to this. And I have these two different hats that I end up wearing. So I started a company, and it's way easier to start a company than it used to be. So if you're one of those people that's like, I don't know how I'm going to get a job, I'm happy to talk entrepreneurship, and you should hire your really smart classmates that you know, because it is a lot easier. And then I had this other role with strategy consulting where I end up working with really, really big companies that are usually trying to figure out how to grow, and it's hard for them to innovate for some of the reasons that you've heard, but also the public sector, so kind of federal, we have a little bit still, state, and then local, and then the social sector. So family offices, foundations, nonprofits. And so what I'm seeing being done, it varies depending on kind of what space and sector that it is that you're looking at. From an entrepreneur standpoint, you know, and I do still spend a lot of time with Stanford students. Their goal is to build a unicorn, so $1 billion company with fewer than 20 people. And they're not hiring devs. I mean, you can do some pretty cool stuff with the technology if you want to learn. And so seeing a lot of things that are happening there. And again, anytime there's massive disruption like what we're facing right now, there's opportunity that ends up being created. In the public sector, I think there's things around like policy and how should they be thinking about policy, who's training these models. Usually it's attorney generals who are enforcing, but they don't necessarily know. And so there's some interesting things that are happening there in the public sector as they're trying to keep up to speed with what's happening and think through where we might need good policy. There's lots of opportunity there. And then in the for-profit world, it does really vary. I think this misconception, most of the cases I'm hearing right now are about productivity, and that's super cool. Like productivity is great. We need productivity. But if you think back to when, well, you guys don't remember. We remember when the iPhone came out and you couldn't imagine the App Store at the time. You were just like, this is a fancier phone with like a great camera. But now we have the App Store and there's this whole ecosystem. So there will probably be some really interesting things that we can't even imagine that go a lot beyond productivity. And even with AI, it's so much more than just generative AI. There's computer visioning. There's really cool things being done in manufacturing with that. So just kind of broadening what it is that's possible there. What's fueling the hype? I mean, we could have a long conversation about that. Kind of follow the money and understand how people are making it and who's publishing things. We've seen kind of top 1% of companies hoard more resources, and we've seen consolidation in media. So there's just, from an economic standpoint, it's a really interesting time, but definitely follow the money and make sure you understand motivations of who's fueling hype. And then for us, we kind of 2 and 3 go together. So we definitely hire entry level. We like younger. So Connor interned with us. We have a fellowship program, so if people are interested. And our hope this summer was actually by bringing in students from a lot of different schools, we get a sense on how you were using it. We were surprised that people were hesitant because in a lot of the universities, it seemed like you're getting scared not to use it. And as we freed people up to use it more and differently, we realized that you have very different use cases and I feel like my generation. So for example, therapy with generative AI or like relations, like dating tips. That's not something I would have thought of as a use case. I think older people tend to use it as like a smarter Google. So if you have the ways that you're using it, I'd encourage you to share because that's actually really helpful. And that's how we're going to get really, really good ideas in place. The entry-level hiring changes I'm seeing at a lot of my clients. So they want people who know you learn a little bit faster when you're younger. And so bring that insight and point of view into the company that will get you hired. Especially if you have like really niche expertise in something like Anthropic, NCP, or something like that. That's something bigger companies are curious about. So that would certainly be something to think through. I think some of the issues with hiring are actually a broader issue with companies have spent so much money on tech. They have to be careful on their hiring standpoint. And there's just uncertainty with the economy. And when that tends to happen, you tend to see a little bit slower hiring. So I'm not sure necessarily if it's AI replacing jobs yet. And there's some really good stuff that's coming out of the Federal Reserve Bank. They asked this in the Beige Book question now. So if you guys really like data, you can find some of that too.
Thanks. Yeah, great insights. If you have anything more to share, please do. But I would say I found it very interesting. A couple weeks ago, I was meeting up with a couple of friends from Amazon who are both economists there, and it was published just recently, to go along to Christy's point, that Amazon had broad cuts. I want to say something like 10% cut in their workforce, or a large amount of their workforce was cut. And immediately every news story I saw after this was AI leading to job cuts at Amazon. Like there was an immediate link drawn from job cuts to must be AI. Like nothing else was considered. And I brought this up to my friends and said, wow, AI has really made a dent in Amazon. They're like, no, it's not. They're like, we just took what Amazon does is if this is probably a surprise to no one, they hyper track productivity. And what they did was they took the bottom 10% of people who were underperforming in their minds, or the least productive people, and got rid of them. And what they're doing is essentially rehiring. You see like a lot of the same jobs popping up now to be hired at Amazon. So that was really just sort of a cleaning house of low productivity people. But I would say be cautious when you read headlines that say hiring is down, because of AI, or cuts at this company were due to another result or another fatality of AI. Well, they're just making these sort of causal assumptions when it's really just correlation. It's not. There's probably a myriad of reasons why these things are happening. So thank you all for that insight. Let's move on to skills. So I'll talk broadly about this, and whoever wants to start can. You can talk about any part of this you think is interesting. So are there any skills that you think are more important now? You know, if we think about the world pre-AI versus post-AI, do you think there are any skills now that are more important? And maybe if you could think of one, if you could recommend one sort of human skill that's most critical for sort of career resilience. And if you have any tips for how people might develop this skill now, it might be particularly helpful to current students if there's any courses or topics or majors that you think you would recommend. And you mentioned this a little bit earlier, Christy, but if you were looking at a resume and somebody had some sort of AI experience on that resume, would they stand apart in sort of an all else equal sort of way? Like all else equal, would you hire somebody who has AI experience over someone who does not? Everything else on their resume is the same. And if so, what would productive AI experience even look like on a resume? So any of those things, if you'd like to, feel free, anyone can jump in.
I'll start just because I happen to be holding the microphone at the moment. And I'll start at the bottom. Does Gen AI experience improve a resume? I think it certainly can. I do a lot of resume review and interviewing for my job. And I think of everything as tools in a toolbox. So for an accountant, if you know how to use Excel or Alteryx or Power BI, those are the types of tools that we use in our work. And now Gen AI is becoming one of those. So I don't think it needs to be any specific skill set that you need to have or ability to design a Gen AI chatbot. We can license those, they're available. It's more about how you use them and just have some experience working with one of those tools that's becoming more commonplace. The other one I wanted to comment on is what specific skills are more important in the era of AI. I think it's whatever skills you're here at Western to learn. If you're in the accounting program or someone who's in supply chain, it's still knowing the basics and the fundamentals of the work that you're going to be doing. What are the accounting rules? What are the tax rules? What are the principles of economics? Because that's when Gen AI becomes a boost to your capabilities, is you still know what the right answers are, what they should be. You're just using Gen AI to get there more quickly or expand on your thoughts, but you're still relying on your experience and your background to vet those and come up with the initial starting point for anything you're doing.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'm thinking a lot lately. What skills do we need as human beings in the age of AI? And I'm thinking, okay, I believe we evolved as humans. Okay, so that's my premise, you guys. We evolved, and when we evolved, we did not have exponential rate of change. Everything was the same. And now all of a sudden, right, this is the hockey stick puck. And we are going like this, and our human brains have not evolved to keep up with this pace of change, and it's freaking a lot of people out. So I think one of the biggest human skills you could have is, always can be called different things, but there's EQ, IQ, AQ, adaptability quotient. I think you really have to learn how to be adaptable in this age, because who knows what the future is going to hold. There's all sorts of predictions, but you need to have that adaptable mindset. And how can you get it? I listen to an app called Waking Up by Sam Harris. That's helped me like calm my brain. And there's also Headspace to get a starter, because you guys have no idea what's going to be in your future. We have no idea what's going to be a future. So you have to have the right mindset to do that. And I also think critical thinking is important, just like what you alluded to, that you need to have domain expertise. So when AI gives an output, you know whether it's right, wrong, or totally off the rails. So I think that combination of domain expertise and knowing how to apply AI to it is going to position you really well in the upcoming job market. And some courses, I don't know, how about philosophy, you guys? Like, how do we know what we know? It's pretty meta in the AI world about their applied linguistics. I don't know. So would I have anybody change their major? No, let's say you're a computer science major. Do you love computer science? Or are you going into it because you're going to make $200,000 as a new grad? So I think you have to see, if you love computer science, stick with it. There are going to be fewer computer scientists hired, I think. So that's my take.
I want to just,
Yeah.
I just want to emphasize one point that you made, which was on the emotional intelligence. I do think that's going to become really important, because as Gen AI becomes more prevalent, particularly in the customer service realm that we that Adam pointed out. If you think about when you have a question and it's like your website comes up, do you want to chat with a chatbot? Or you call into a customer service line and you get the robot and you're just like, please, can I just talk to a human? So if you are able to deliver that, whatever job that you're providing, that human interaction, the communication skills, being able to have some empathy that Gen AI is probably not going to be able to produce, that's going to be really impactful to whoever you're interacting with.
Okay. Yeah, this is great. I mean, I already alluded to, I think you should put AI experience. I find my students at both the UW and Stanford don't highlight some of the things that they're doing. And ideally you can explain like the situation and how you're able to shortcut. So for example, I had a student that like downloaded all the 10Ks and was able to like get some assignment done much faster because he built like a model to do that. You should highlight that. That's cool, right? And somebody else that was showing a class project on lifetime value customer and being able to calculate something that probably would have taken analysts like 2 or 3 weeks at a company in like half a day by setting it up right. So if you've come up with something like that, do put it on your resume, but really orient it in the results that it is that you're driving, not just, you know, I use generative AI. Undergraduate courses, one of our clients talks about a pie-shaped career, which is like you need to be a generalist in a lot of different things. There's just kind of common things that you need to know, but then trying to go deep in 2 areas. It used to be more of a T-shaped career, but like do have a couple areas where you can go deep, which I do think is pretty interesting. You know, innovation is still hard. For generative AI to do is just predictive models, right? And so to imagine crazy things like humans can do, at least right now, it's not necessarily all that good at breakthrough innovation. And that comes from diverse perspectives coming together. So I think just reading lots of different things, being in kind of liberal arts or you know, social sciences and the hard sciences, that's where you're going to get really good ideas coming into play. I do think that there's a Stanford stuff online with this group called Corporations and Society. They have a lot of really interesting videos and coursework. And then there's HAI, which is out of Stanford as well. They also have a bunch of free coursework. So you can learn anything you want to learn online. Just make sure that it's like credible and matches to your style. And there's a lot that's out there. And then the specific skills, you know, I did this talk like 9 years ago now for a bunch of superintendents in K-12 schools. It was like the robots are coming and what does this mean? And we could see even 9 years ago that Google and the big tech companies were using computer science to program things. So we just went out and surveyed a bunch of employers and we go back and ask them regularly now. So I'll share some of the things. They already mentioned critical thinking. It's hard to have IQ and EQ in the same person. So like there's many types of intelligence. So figure out like where you spike and where you're above average, but being able to manage yourself ends up being really important. And then all the social capital, which like you're in school right now and people want to help students out. So I'd really encourage you to build relationships now and really build your own social capital. There was a piece actually around just being entrepreneurial. So that goes, I think, with being adaptive, but like, can you figure out how to get results, right? Can you create positive value? So I think that's important. Creativity, that's another place where it's still a little bit challenging, although we think saw an AI song like hit the charts this week. But there's a belief that it might take longer for more of the creative skills to come into play. I think this metacognition, so like knowing how you learn, this is an awesome time if you love to learn. Like Notebook LLM, I mean, you can get into the format you like. If you like podcasts, you can have AI build a podcast for you of your learning materials. If you need flashcards, like you can get them built pretty quickly and then just kind of drill yourself in the way that works for you. And then the last one that I'll emphasize is really around, I put this on here. If you don't know, Notebook LLM will only go to the sources you feed it. And there's already a bunch of modules in there, like the entire work of Shakespeare. And so you can query it of like, what do I was like, oh, I wish I had time because I would just be here all the time. And then you can it will set up a podcast, but you can like call in and be like, I'm confused about this concept, and it'll talk to you and interact with you. It's crazy. So again, like know your format for learning and then come up with ways to learn. And then the last piece that I'll add, just because it is possible there'll be some disruption, and this has always been the case with tech, and I think it's gotten a little bit worse, that or better on their point of view, they prefer contractors over employees. So a lot of the tech companies in town have about a third that's employees, 2/3 that's vendors or contractors. That means that you're probably not going to get your benefits through your employer. So I would encourage you, and Western has a great program on financial literacy, like just know how to be able to take care of yourself financially. So it isn't as scary if like maybe some of the job things end up being more disrupted, or if you have to get your own healthcare or retirement plans. But just with the disruption, if you have that financial literacy, you'll free up some options. And if you want to be an entrepreneur, you can also make that happen.
Yeah, I just want to add one thing. Here's what I've been thinking about lately. As an English major, here's what I think another skill that people need to learn. Now that you can code your own apps, like I'd never thought about coding my own app because I'm an English major, but now you can. So I think people need to take the lid off of what you think you can't do because you might be able to do it. But you have to know what AI can do to tap into it. It's an incredibly powerful tool. So pop open the lid.
That's a great point, Dana. Thank you. Returning to Dana's earlier point too, I mean, I think it's really important to say that everyone's speculating about this, and including myself. I think it's really easy when you read the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, whatever you want to do, when you hear a tech CEO make some broad proclamation to say like, oh my gosh, this is going to happen. Dario Amodei, the Anthropic CEO, said maybe 6 months ago that he thought 25% of entry-level white-collar work will be automated within 5 years. And then there was like a 50 in 5 years too. And I think, first of all, be suspicious of any overly round numbers. Like I would tell my clients, like pick 37% over 4 years, something that looks prime. It's very, very hard to imagine that being wrong. But he's speculating too, right? And like it's all kind of like smoke and mirrors on some level. So I think you want to take everything kind of with a lot of grains of salt too. And even if a lot of entry-level white-collar labor will be automated, there's still going to be a lot of opportunity for really smart, driven people like you, as my fellow panelists have said. So when we gave this talk a couple years ago, we used to begin with a slide that said, you know, AI is not going to take your job. Someone using AI will. And I think that was true a couple of years ago, and it's especially true now that, I mean, you're not necessarily competing against AI, you're competing against, you know, somebody else, another applicant who might be able to use AI in a slightly different way than you. So I think you kind of need to think about, you know, first of all, figuring out how your human experience, your human judgment, your human creativity and imagination and ability to think at a macro level and strategically can be smarter than and augment AI in some ways. And then how you can show the employer or whoever you're interviewing with that you can use AI in a more kind of resilient, value-creating way than other applicants too. So it's kind of a double-edged sword now, but it's just kind of thinking a little bit more about how you position yourself as an applicant. So I think like learning how to make custom GPTs is really important, like playing around with Copilot Studio is really good to kind of like move beyond like the table stakes of knowing how to do research with the ChatGPT or using it to like provide an outline or a first draft of a research project for you. Just to kind of hit home on, I think creativity and imagination are really important skills to think about. I mean, AI is really good at doing research right now, pulling from a bunch of different sources. It may hallucinate, it may have some gaps, but it's not particularly good at coming up with, you know, novel ideas. I was listening to a podcast on the way up here from Seattle about, you know, AI and healthcare. Everybody says AI is going to cure cancer. That's like the big social impact thing. Like it might take a ton of jobs, but it's going to cure cancer. No one can tell you how it's going to cure cancer. Cancer is very complicated. It comes in many different forms. If there's anybody in like the medical science world here. But AI has not yet created a new novel pharmaceutical drug, right? Everybody thought, you know, AI was going to be really good at pharmaceutical discovery. Still hasn't done that yet. That's still, you know, humans looking at a bunch of science, thinking about different novel drug pathways and discovery and molecular interaction. So AI will get better, but I think you're going to be the people who are able to think outside the box, kind of pop the lid off and think about, you know, new novel technologies. Like, I don't know if, you know, 15, 20 years ago, Gen AI could come up with the idea for the iPhone because that was kind of like outside the box thinking.
Yeah, that was excellent. I will just piggyback on a couple comments there about the creativity side. I've played a lot in when doing research. The hardest thing in doing research, in my opinion, is coming up with a novel idea. And I've used ChatGPT, Gemini, Anthropic, basically every AI prompt service possible. And I've noticed I'll come up with an idea that's good, and I prompt it, ChatGPT with it, and say, oh, that's a pretty good idea. Here's some ways you could take that. And then I do another idea, my maybe second favorite idea, and it's like, great idea. Here's how you could run with that. And I'm like, wait a minute. And I choose like the dumbest idea I've ever come up with. maybe my 2-year-old spat it out one day in between bites of cereal, and it's like, well, that's an interesting idea, but I like it. Let's run with it. Everything's a good idea. I've been yet to be told I have a bad idea from ChatGPT or really any prompting. So really, yeah, AI does not know what's a good idea, what's not a good idea, frankly, and it's not very good at that sort of creativity domain. That's where we still have a human advantage. And I was going to save this for the tools portion, but since Christy mentioned it, this is such a cool tool and a really low entry. Like if you want to get your hands on a really cool AI tool that's really easy to use and I think really beneficial and doesn't require any technical knowledge, Notebook LM from Google is a great place to start. It's free. There are upgraded versions, but really, Christy mentioned it's a grounded tool, and that just simply means it only is going to synthesize and interpret and do stuff with the things you load into it. So this is perfect for like research. I can upload a bunch of papers, have it do a literature review. Or if I think this would be great for like a class. If you have a class with material or slides, you can put it in this. It will synthesize it. It will come up with quizzes based on it. If you want to like simulate a test, it will turn it into a podcast. It will create flashcards for you. It's a really amazing way to organize thoughts. It can output reports. It can output essentially anything you want. So really low level way to get started with AI if you want to just organize your thoughts or create something cool but you don't want to deal with all the hallucinations or let's be real, they're errors. They're not hallucinations. AI is not a person. We tend to anthropomorphize it, right? You say it hallucinates. Well, no, it just makes errors. But this is a really sort of controlled way, and I think really useful way. So thank you, Christy, for pointing that out. Along those lines, let's turn to AI tools. And if there's any more that we haven't talked about that you would recommend, either for enhancing current skills or building new skills that you might not already have. And then maybe if not specific tools, if people are just experimenting with AI, how can they use AI both responsibly and strategically? And then maybe sort of an interesting, if you have any insights on this, have there been at your company or in your industry, do you know of any ethical dilemmas that have arisen and how those dilemmas were sort of navigated? And then if you have employees working underneath you and they come back with a report, to what extent is that employee's responsibility to verify sort of the veracity of the claims being made? Is that on you as reviewing their work? Is that on the employee? How do you navigate that? So maybe I might start with Seth here, our AI ethicist, if you'd like to start with your thoughts on any of these things.
Being called an ethicist, the ethicist at Facebook Meta made some pretty terrible decisions recently. If you want to read about the news, so AI tools. I mean, I'm kind of agnostic to tools. I think they're all kind of better in certain different ways. I think Anthropic's Claude's kind of having a moment right now. And actually, not to shamelessly plug my work, but our new supercharged chat PwC actually allows you to pick basically any model you want for different settings. It won't tell you what the best model will be, but you can do it. So I think just kind of broadly experimenting is good. I think the real challenge here, as an ethicist, and where we see a lot of corporate clients really concerned is their employees over-relying on the technology. A buzzword I've heard recently is cognitive offloading, but actually just like letting the machine or the technology do work that you should be doing cognitively yourself. And there's something a lot of employers really worry about. And it's not like people develop automation bias overnight. I mean, it takes months or years, but that's a real concern and often slows AI adoption, which might actually be beneficial to the company in the long run. And I think it's something that you as students and you as young professionals in a year or two do need to be aware of. You don't want to be relying too much on technology. And I do see, frankly, I know it's being recorded, but I do see some young employees who are fresh out of school really using the technology. I'll ask folks to take notes in meetings, which is like a time-honored tradition since, I don't know, the candle and the quill was created or something. And they'll be sitting there and they'll be like hitting a key like every 60 seconds. And at the end of the meeting, I'm like, where are the notes? And then they give me the Copilot summaries. Copilot summaries are pretty good, but they often leave out a big chunk or kind of theme there. So I think it's really good to continue to use your human judgment. And actually, even just taking notes from a meeting, especially when you're new to an organization or a client, is really helpful because you actually have to synthesize key points. You have to think about key takeaways. You have to track a lot. It's actually a really good skill to develop. And one thing that's happening with automation and potentially hiring fewer entry-level workers, whether it's at a law firm, an accounting firm, a professional services firm, is you're kind of affecting the pyramid that happens too. And you're not going to have as many people kind of at that associate, more junior level who are developing the skills and intuition over time, who ultimately, get promoted or eventually like a managing director or a partner at these consulting firms. So you will have to, I think, as young employees, try to develop that intuition a little bit more quickly and get more reps in seeing different technology. So ethical dilemmas, largely, I think, automation bias, being aware of errors or hallucinations. Everybody calls them hallucinations. It's something else. And then as an AI ethicist, as somebody who does responsible AI, there's also a lot of bias in these systems. Everybody assumed that machines were going to be unbiased. Humans are biased, machines will be better, but surprise, surprise, you feed in biased data into the model, you're going to get biased outputs. And then you also have bias that develops over time too, as you get data drift and model drift too. So there's quite a bit to think about. We spend a lot of time developing AI governance tools, processes at companies to ensure that AI is being used or operates as intended. It has the desired impact. It's a performance issue. It's also an ethics issue. And then we spend a lot of time actually training employees on how to use it responsibly. So testing the outputs yourself, not relying on it, flagging issues if you think the model's beginning to degrade, for example.
Yeah, I don't really have a lot to add because I think it's been said, and I love Notebook LM too. I know. And then the new models change all the time. Like ChatGPT 5 came out with the big splash. I hated ChatGPT 5. So then I moved over to Claude. I loved Claude, but now ChatGPT 5.1 came out and it's so much better. So I'm moving back to ChatGPT 5.1. So yeah, any of the major LLMs, it's super fun. If you haven't made any images with Gemini's Nano Banana, that's really fun. Suno for music. There's so many AI tools out there besides just the major chat bots. And here's what I run into a lot training clients. They're worried about, or how about you guys? Because they're worried about putting some information into AIs. Is their data going to leak, their proprietary information in their business? So how much can I trust AI not to leak my data? So I run into that a lot, even if it's business models where it's not supposed to. That's a big concern for the people that I've run into. So that's just.
Yeah, I've not used Notebook LM, but I don't think I could assign homework to this group, but I would definitely advise everybody to try that. I know in our work, and I'm sure PwC has done a lot of effort in this area as well, to put in grounding data. So what do you want your Gen AI to reference? And you will see when you have the right grounding data, how much better response you get. So maybe you could take one of your class assignments or something you're working on and try just one of the chat tools without grounding data and see what you get, and then use Notebook LM and put some grounding data in and see how much better or different the answer is. The other item I wanted to address is, what is the employee's responsibility regarding verifying information? It is entirely your responsibility. Has everybody heard the story about the attorney that submitted a case brief with the made-up court cases? So ChatGPT is not going to get fired for doing that, but the attorney almost got disbarred, and I'm sure he was very embarrassed. So when you go into your work and you want to utilize these tools, remember that you're still responsible for verifying it and confirming that it's accurate. And that's why I say your foundation of skills you're learning here in your classes is still going to be tremendously important, because you need something to verify. The other good point is, as students and new coming hires into the workforce, you will probably have a lot of supervisors that can help you check those things and manage your work. But you still are responsible for that.
Yeah, and obviously somebody was upset. I think I'm an entrepreneur, and entrepreneurs have to be pathological optimists. And I think some of this too is if I think too much about like all the change that's happening, and I have kids, and I don't know. I mean, I have twin 11-year-olds. One of them refuses to answer the question on what he wants to be when he grows up, because he's like, we don't even know what jobs are going to be around in 2 years. Right? Like, I could be super anxious because it is an interesting world right now. I think hardest things about what happened with COVID is losing control. And you guys lost a lot, right? The ages you were when you didn't get your prom or your graduation or all those things, it can strip away a sense of agency, but each person can actually do more than they want, more than they think. If you believe that you can, and if you kind of tap into social capital, other humans, follow the money, like understand what's actually happening. The tool is just a tool. It could be used for good or for evil, but I think there's a responsibility for us to be moral and paying attention to what's happening. We did hit on Notebook LM, which I love. There's agent mode, which will like click websites, so you can have it set up trips and do things for you. I set up projects for things that I care about, where I want to like remember what I've done time and time again. We have custom GBTs that we use for different things. We're mostly testing internally right now, just because we aren't sure. So I do think that it's an interesting time to be experimenting. And then, like, in terms of the ethical dilemmas, a lot of the major companies that I work with, well, a lot of them are thinking about upskilling and reskilling, because they do think that this is going to change. There's just going to be things that they're worried about. They're also worried about the K-shaped economy, the fact that we have like the top and the bottom and not a lot in the middle. And like that usually doesn't bode well with society, especially if you combine that with young men not employed. And so like, I think, again, all of us have a responsibility to try to do some things here. But some of the big tech companies are really taking a global lens. We've been pretty US centric, but like other countries have different policies around AI. And that has implications if you're working in Europe, for example, where they might regulate very differently than China. So I just think it's like paying attention, being aware, trying to understand as much as you can. We did see one ethical dilemma at a client with one of the tech companies that now has forced everybody back into the office, where people had automated most of their job and working like 2 or 3 jobs at the same time. Some of you might have seen the person who was like consulting the tech companies and basically was working for like 10 at the same time. And they were all like competitors that probably shouldn't have been doing that. So again, the good old, I don't know if you still use this in ethics, that question of like, if this was on the front page of whatever newspaper you read or media you look at, would you be okay with everything being public? I do think that still is a really, really good rule of thumb. And then just surround yourself with people with different perspectives and talk about it and share what it is that you're doing, and then continue to keep learning. I mean, you're lucky to be at Western. It's an awesome institution. There's some fabulous professors here who have points of view. Go to their office hours, ask them what they're thinking. Nobody has answers on any of this right now. We're all trying to figure it out. But over the course of history, when humans have banded together, we've actually done a good job at in innovating and not hurting folks.
I do think I'm all for optimism. I think things can get kind of pessimistic pretty quickly. In the responsible AI space, we think a lot about risks and potential harms. So I can't watch, Black Mirror on Netflix, for example, because those dystopian futures don't actually always seem that kind of far-fetched. One, risk and impact here too that we haven't talked about, which is distressing to a lot of people, perhaps like your classmate too, is the environmental impact of AI. So like all those characters you're putting into ChatGPT, I write please and thank you, for example. And Sam Altman, so I'm not just picking on Anthropic, Sam Altman was asked about this several months ago, and he was asked, does it make sense to say please and thank you? And he said, that's like $50 to $100 million in, credits, basically, and there's a big environmental impact. But he said, like maybe it's worth doing just in case, implying that, when we get to like AGI or super general intelligence, like maybe we want to keep the machines on our side and have been polite to them and not treated them. So it's kind of a wild world. So I think it's important to just remember that, as Christy was saying, that these are socio-technical systems. Like we develop them. They're neither good nor bad. They're just like as evil or not evil as we make them. So I think we do have a lot of agency in this too. It can be a little overwhelming when you see these like multi-trillion-dollar companies now, which is hard to imagine, developing these things. And if you follow the money too, you'll see that there's not actually as much money in the system, because there's a lot of circular investment, or round tripping, as it's sometimes called, in the illicit business community. So it's an interesting potential house of cards, and there's probably going to be some market correction or bubble bursting at some point, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that's a shared opinion among many people. Well, thank you for all these insights. A real big part of this is if you have questions, we want to make sure you have the opportunity to ask them. I saw a couple hands up. I will point you out in just a second. I just want to also mention that if you want to claim your badge, you can do so here, and then we'll move to Zoom questions. But I saw one hand here first. Yes, please.
been also a lot of investment that they just do like NVIDIA investing in OpenAI and then OpenAI buying back to NVIDIA to OpenAI buying like AMD tools. And that's still a thing. What you think about it, this is kind of similar to the dot-com bubble back at the time. Do you think it's going to happen to AI bubble?
So the question is about circular. I'll just repeat the question for our audience members zooming in. The question's about circular investing, and does the current sort of economy reflect, in your opinion, sort of the dot-com bubble? Are we in an AI bubble? Oh, here.
I don't know that I have any tremendous insight on that. I've just read some articles that the investment is so great, but the life cycle of the chips that we're relying on to produce Gen AI is very short. So that's not the typical return on investment that companies look for. So that's driving some of the worry that there's a huge investment now, and it's going to need to be repeated again and again, at least until the chips become much cheaper and more available.
I'll just tell a quick story. I don't know if this will help, but again, it's a weird world right now. So we've had the great privilege of working with a couple of billionaires, but one of them was wanting to catch up, and he's like, "What are you doing with your cash?" And I was like, "I do not have cash like you have." And he's like, "I'm just worried because everything seems overinflated right now." And he's like, "Should I be in collectibles?" And I'm like, "I'm not a financial planner. Like, I don't know, but I'm just seeing this question come up so much right now." And the markets feel a little off, but they felt off for a while. So there's still a lot of money that's sloshing around that people are trying to find places for it. I think it's a great question for your finance and your econ professors.
Don't ask me. I don't know. Yeah, so I'll go to Alex here, and I'll jump around here. Yes.
Talking especially about low-level hiring. I've heard a couple of things you guys said that I felt were maybe slightly contradictory, and I was wondering if I could ask about them. Especially to Christy, you mentioned hiring low-level people, but said that skills like really model context protocol, which is a relatively deep-level skill, was a nice to have. Justin, we're still hiring lots of accountants, but then said, we're hiring people because we need them to have deep knowledge, and GAAP and the tax codes are each about 3,000 pages long. That exact reason is why you need 2,000 hours under a professional before you get your CPAs. That's how you get that expertise. Dana, you mentioned very briefly also domain expertise. And interestingly said, you actually did note this exact thing by saying that a lot of people, because there's slightly lower entry-level hiring, that a lot of people aren't getting this stuff. So my two questions are, if you're a new person and you haven't been able to get in the course, how do you just get your foot in the door to actually prove that you have this knowledge or this expertise? And kind of relate to that, and especially towards Dana and Seth, that any of you, do you find that when you're implementing AI protocols or AI training, that the companies you're working with are choosing to start from the top down, or are they also doing much of that training focused on their low-level employees?
I'm going to try to summarize those two questions. I'll just say how the first part was about how is entry-level hiring changing. Is there anything contradictory about needing domain-level expertise, but also still willing to hire entry-level people? And then the second question is, when you're training people, where do you start? Do you start at the top down, or work your way from the bottom up, or everywhere, maybe all at once? So whoever wants to chime in.
Yeah, really good questions. Thank you for all those. I will say, one of your questions was, how do you get those entry-level positions? I mean, certainly coming to an event like this, and hopefully the networking session afterward, meeting people. Companies are still going to want, entry-level people, students coming out of college. So there's certainly still going to be a demand for that. But for the training component, I think it's just going to be much quicker, and the level of skills that they expect to have earlier in your career is going to be up. Now, part of that is going to come from training, and I know, coming from a financial services background, and Seth can certainly back this up, invest tons in training. So developing the skill sets we want in people, and there certainly have changed since I started my career, and how Gen AI factors in that is going to be a big component. And then your second question about how is the training going on? In my company, we have lots of new hires and people that have been there for 30 years. And it's like a shotgun approach, just like everybody needs to be trained on this. We want to upskill everybody as quickly as we can.
Anybody else have insights they want to share? Oh.
That's one thing that I think is a bit unfortunate that I see in this market versus some other markets that I'm in. In this market, I'm referring to Washington State, but mostly Western Washington. Usually companies hire for either potential or for skills. So you can see if some companies hiring for potential, if they invest a lot in training, if they have apprenticeship or mentorship programs. So those are things that you can look for, and that they're going to make more of a bet on you, and they're also going to invest and want you to stay around. So you can ask questions ahead of time on like, what are your training programs? Do you have mentorship? You can get a sense for if people hang around. Unfortunately, there are a lot of companies around here that want to know you did exactly this thing at a company with a big brand that they recognize. And that's just, unfortunately, this labor market for whatever reason. So I do think that that's just a part to be paying attention to. And yeah, it is a bit confusing right now what is happening. I do think there's this old reference like 6 degrees to Kevin Bacon, but it's probably 5 degrees now. So loose connections end up being super helpful. So I'd say have a goal and share it. Like, here's what I want to do. Do you know anybody who's hiring or looking for a project? And then I think, even this comment about taking notes in meetings, be a self-starter and study, and kind of like nothing's beneath you. It'll teach you something, which I think is actually a really great way to learn. The thing with the note taking is like, you're also then in a room where senior people are having a conversation. You can learn something from that if you're observing and studying and asking questions and being super curious. And I do think just being clear on like, here's this thing I'm looking for. Do you know anybody who's hiring for that? And like, who else should I talk to? And following up and saying thank you. So that social capital is going to be really important in this market for a while.
I have to chime in just because it came back to me, but I think it was a really insightful point about hiring for potential. As students realize when you're going to entry-level job, I don't think anybody's expecting you to know everything. They want to train you. That's why they're hiring you as a recent graduate. So keep that in mind and be willing to continue to learn more and take handwritten notes. That's a tremendous way to learn something. So just really be ready to continue your learning after you start your career.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll move on to, yes, in the hat, please.
And I've been thinking a lot about how ChatGPT and AI developers kind of market, they want their product to be, the outputs from their products to be as credible as possible and not hallucinate, but at the same time, then they denounce their results or the outputs, right? They want no responsibility for the outputs. So how can students get sort of their knowledge if they're kind of studying, if they're learning from potentially sort of false or hallucinated outputs?
So the question is about how can we learn from a system which is output based, but at the same time takes no responsibility for that output, and how can students sort of best learn from that, if there's insight?
I think it's a good plug to pay attention to you and Audrey and Adam, people that have been doing it for a long time and have that background. Pay attention in class, basically, to know like, what is the basis for this? How can I interpret these answers would be my advice.
Any other insight? Yes, pay attention to me. That's exactly.
I'll give another quick plug. There's this group called the Transparency AI Coalition, founded in Seattle area. But it was somebody who is like, we actually should have more transparency on what's training these models, because again, it's just predictive, right? And so you have to know if it's biased sources that are going in. So just, I think learning to ask the questions on like what's the training base beneath this, might it be biased, and continuing to answer those questions. And tech, I don't know, Section 230, right? Like they're just a platform. They're not responsible for anything that happens on it until there's like regulatory changes with that. They're just going to be a platform, and that's going to be their answer.
I'll go to this side just because, yes, right here in the green. So.
Do you think there'll be a shift from reliance like that more towards target schools or not?
So the question is about pipeline. Maybe could you elaborate? What do you mean by target schools?
Like say like a
I see. So maybe I could rephrase a little bit, like does your pipeline matter maybe more or less in the era of AI when it comes to certain types of jobs, do you think? Or is this maybe a great equalizer whereby it'll be more meritocratic?
Maybe too soon to tell. I think with what you're getting at is recruiting and how firms approach hiring, it's always going to be a return on investment problem for them. So if they know, the Ivy League schools or certain business schools are going to produce the skill set that they want, they're going to go there. Now, that doesn't mean if you didn't go there that you don't have as many opportunities. 3 out of 4 of us graduated from Western. I think we'd all say it prepared us very well for our roles and our careers that we've developed since we've graduated. I think the key is if you're not at a pipeline school or if that's a concern, the networking becomes more important, gaining some experience, just getting your foot in the door, maybe taking a little extra step to come to an event like this or do some networking or go to a conference down in Seattle, stuff like that. So people know that you're there and willing to enter the workforce.
I'll add something real quick. I'll head back to you. Anybody from Ferndale? Do you guys know where Ferndale is? Yay. Okay, I'm from Ferndale too. No AP classes when I was there, second to Western. And I'm so grateful for my time here again. There's like incredible faculty here. I didn't appreciate it. I didn't want to go to Western, but anyway, it all worked out the way it was meant to work out. And I remember like an econ association where I was saying I thought I wanted to go to grad school, and they're like, Western's, not a pipeline into top schools. It's all my husband's fault. I ended up going to Stanford for my MBA, so super fortunate, got very, very lucky with that, and it dramatically changed the trajectory because all of a sudden I was at a pipeline school, and then I went to this company called McKinsey that only has 17 universities in the world that they recruit from on a regular basis. So that kind of stuff makes you mad, right? Which it did. It did me because I was like, I wouldn't have been hired given my background, and I can't help the fact I was born in Ferndale. So if you believe that like talent is agnostic to geography and like want to play Moneyball, go start something or get into a role where you can hire and like figure out where there's amazing talent that might be overlooked, because there's amazing talent in this world hanging out in all kinds of places, and the tools do make it a bit easier to play Moneyball and you don't have to use the shortcuts. I've been fooled by kids from Harvard and Stanford that didn't work as hard as like students from Western. So again, if this stuff annoys you, like figure out a way to go create some competition.
And I just want to iterate what you have said this a lot, and I think it's super important. Social capital. It's networking and who you know and what you know. But yes, you have to be a dynamite person and a stellar student to begin with. But social capital is it. So the fact that you guys are in this room networking and talking to people is huge. So congrats.
I would say anecdotally looking at the market, and I went to business school too. I went to the humble UW down the road, not Stanford, but I do think that for the first or second job out of undergrad or grad school, your pipeline, whatever you want to call it, the prestige of your college university matters a bit. But after that, like it kind of goes out the window. It's still nice to be able to like swing by the Harvard Club in Manhattan or whatever. Whitman College does not have a club in Manhattan. It would be bad for the environment, so we don't have one. But I don't think it matters. I don't think it matters as much. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. So, and the other thing too that I've heard a lot recently is, and I think as an undergrad or a grad student, it's so easy to really just focus on the first job you have. And that first job you have, you probably won't be there for more than 18 to 24 months. Your employer doesn't necessarily count on that. So if you want to get into private equity, it might be like a 2 or 3 step approach. It might not be the first thing that you do. And what you end up doing, at the end of your career, even if you have like 12 different jobs, is probably gonna be very different than the first thing you do. So I wouldn't worry too much.
Great. Yes, in the black here.
Jeff Bezos is a great concept versus things like Marx is what will not change. Like, predictably, people are going to want to buy stuff for cheaper and they're going to want it faster. So what do you think will not change as a result of AI? And then also, what do you guys think about intellectual property rights in this context and how AI will disrupt that? Like, all that stuff.
So 2-part question. First, what is more permanent in the age of AI, or maybe what will be changing slower? What do we foresee will be still a viable maybe business plan 10, 15 years down the road? Yeah, durable things that are not going away. And then the second part is, remind me your second part of your question. I've lost it. Sorry. Oh, IP. So yeah, is your thoughts on intellectual property? Obviously, AI models scrape a lot of IP. It's very different in the U.S. context and versus Europe, which there's a lot of regulatory oversight to that. Maybe you could talk about it in your company or industry. Like, do you regulate within in sort of any sense to make sure that you're using your own IP and not other people's, or is that not even a concern?
No, one of the companies I worked with, oh yeah, we had it off in case we were talking among ourselves. It was hot mic. But one of the companies I worked with only uses Adobe images because Adobe said these are our images. We did not scrape them from the internet. And so it's like this moral conviction for the company to use that as opposed to have an AI generated image, which who knows where the IP is being taken from, and you can't copyright total IP images.
I think one interesting note as it relates to IP is we've already seen some controversy with, musical artists having Gen AI produce a song like them. I don't think we're dealing with quite with that issue in the financial services realm. But one thing we do have to deal with is, can we use our clients' financial information to help us refine our models and incorporate them? And some are okay with that, and some say no. And having a mechanism in place to separate the two and make sure we don't do something we're not is definitely a concern and something we focus on a lot at my firm. Your first question about what's going to be the durable experience, the things that you cannot be recreated by Gen AI are going to become more important. So we've talked about social capital and networking in the experience. Gen AI will not be able to create an ideal sunset vacation for you. So those type of things and the ability to create them, or in the work sense, distinguish yourself as a professional and somebody that people want to work with, is going to be more and more important. And I think will continue for far into the future.
There's a question in the back. Yes.
Expectation of AI in school now, like in our classes, versus like when we go into the workforce where the expectation is integrated positively.
Yeah.
That's a big
Yeah, so I think it's a great question. The question is about how should students or anybody really think about the gap between how there's hesitancy towards AI, especially in higher education, versus it sounds like a lot in the real world, in the workforce, it's sort of flipped. There's expectations that you sort of know it, and maybe how can students sort of bridge that gap? Or maybe your insights into how you think about that. Is it just that higher education, we're just slow-moving animals? Is that just the problem?
Because I let students use it, and other professors are like, make them use blue books. I was like, I don't want to grade blue books. Like, the handwriting's gonna be terrible. So I think this goes back to the comment Dana made earlier and was reinforced around critical thinking. So like, understand the context and the environment that you're in and like what the rules are, and then kind of play within those. I do also think it's okay as students for you to advocate, like to ask professors to bring things up at the university. I mean, you can change things too if you have opinions on what it is that can be done. But then also, if it's a hard no, like the rules are the rules, respecting that that's the case. It will also happen in the real world. A couple of the companies that we work with, because they work actually in Europe, they have some pretty strict rules on what can and can't be done with AI. And that's just part of being in an environment, in an organization. So I do think like, understand the context you're in and the rules that are there, and the game that's being played, and then match to that. And if you think there's something that should be changed, like trying to see if there's a way you can make some change happen.
I just want to advocate for making change happen, because as someone who teaches AI literacy, I think it's my bias, you guys, that a lot of profs aren't letting AI in the classroom because they don't know about it. And so who's going to teach them to know about it in order to teach the students? Okay, since I don't work at the faculty, I can say things like that. Anybody else? I put myself in the line before it is.
Yeah, gentlemen in the suit. I have to patronize the other suit wearer here. Thank you.
Also, yeah,
Oh, even better.
next like decade or so where chip capacity dramatically decreases, like if TSMC's fabs all get destroyed or something, what would unlearning AI in the workplace look like if they had to take like a big step back?
So the question, yeah, this is another good question about suppose AI takes a big reversion, or the things that drive AI chips, for example. NVIDIA is a large chip maker, but some context here. NVIDIA has not come up with any new technology for chips in probably a decade. They just found a way to fit more transistors into a smaller space. It's not like they've invented some new chip. So maybe you could even comment on, like, if we do see this reversion or pullback from AI, do you have any suggestions to be sort of resilient in that space as well? Or maybe you can even speculate on do you even see such a thing happening?
I can just start off. That's a great question. That's the first time I've heard a question like that. And there are a lot of, I think, geopolitical scenarios or technological scenarios where something like that would happen. I mean, you basically have some kind of like AI winter where, AI technology would not work particularly well. And we've had other AI winters in the last, since like the 1950s. So whether or not it's chips, I think there is a lot of uncertainty, and you'd really just kind of have to fall back on human judgment. I think that's easier for people like us who've been in the workforce for longer and know what it was like to not use generative AI. But if you're like a 25-year-old employee and you've been kind of using Gen AI as a crutch for the first like 2 to 3 years that you're in a new career, I could see it being a lot harder too. But there is a lot of uncertainty. Even if chip manufacturing continues, chips get better. I mean, the AI models might not continue to get better and better exponentially in the way that we think that they will. And then there's also the big uncertainty too is just I should have said this earlier, that companies don't adopt AI as broadly as we think they will too, whether or not that's because of chips or performance or general market conditions or boards of directors and investors who say you need to stop spending billions of dollars on this, for example.
How about you guys personally who use AI all the time? What if you couldn't use it? Yeah, like what do you use it day to day? Who uses it? Okay, Christy, what would your life be like if just what?
I mean, I freak out when like the internet goes down, right? I mean, I just think that so in some ways this creates some opportunity because and we didn't talk about this just given the topic of the panel, but there's a desire to make more things in the US right now. And, for national security, like lots of countries are trying to figure out how to make sure they're not too dependent. And there's all these like very interesting geopolitical topics that we could dive into. But if I think about not using AI, I mean, that's where I think you still have to like be able to think. And they'll have times where like sometimes I'll be on a flight and there's no Wi-Fi. I'm like, oh, I have a notebook, right? So I'm like, force myself to do some things. So I think it's just like making sure cognitively you're not getting too dependent on any tool, whether it be AI or anything else. And I would encourage you guys to think through like intergenerational mentors too. You mentioned judgment. A lot of my judgment has come from people like much wiser than me that have seen a lot more things where I'm like, I don't know what's going on here, like help me. So I think if you're curious about these sorts of things, there's these AI, what did you call it? Winters? AI winters that have happened since the 1950s. Like find people who've lived through those other times and see what you can learn about them or read about them. Their history tends to rhyme, even if it doesn't repeat. So just that is important to study. Yeah, but if I didn't have it, I'd probably make my kids do more stuff. Right? It'd be like, help mommy organize these files because AI won't do it fast enough.
Well, I think we're at our time limit here. We'll have some time. If your questions didn't get answered, I would encourage you. We're going to stick around for a little bit up front. But if you would give a big round of applause to our panel. Thank you so much. From all of us at Western Econ Department, I'd like to thank the Alumni Foundation, Janine Bankston for helping. Kelly Burton was a great assistant. We'll be here at least till 6. Grab some food on your way out. This recording will be online in a couple days if there's something you missed. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks for coming.